So we have Vrinda Chidambaram from UCR, and I'm...
Thank you. Let me find... Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about what bilinguals can tell us. At least when I wrote my abstract, I thought I was going to be talking about what bilinguals can tell us about the viability of syntactic theories. And to some extent, that's still what I'm going to be talking about, but slightly modified. But first, I think I need to introduce, for some of you at least, sort of some of the basics of what syntax is. What do I really do? Many of you already know, but for those of you who are less familiar with linguistics, what is a syntactician? Well, for syntacticians, generally, the big question is this. What are the mechanisms that operate in the minds of speakers that allow them to form and understand sentences? How does sentence structure work, in essence? And really, this is complicated by a number of factors. There are a lot of challenges that face us in trying to answer this. For one thing, there are a lot of very different languages. Languages don't all look the same. They look pretty different from one another, which is why syntacticians still have jobs. And in addition, these different languages can express one and the same idea in significantly different ways. So in order to understand the fundamental properties of language with a big L, and the mechanisms underlying sentence structure, it's really crucial that we consider how different languages express exactly the same ideas. How do they use different constructs to express the same notions? And to this end, we consult with native speakers of various languages to learn about the sentence structures that they employ in order to convey ideas. And we try to see if we can arrive at any basic generalizations based on these. So we look at various languages, and the languages that I've spent most of my time concerning myself with are Slovenian, which is a Slavic language, Tamil, which is a Dravidian language, and Georgian, which is a Kartvelian language. These are all from very distinct groups. They are genetically unrelated to one another. And they are typologically very distinct from one another as well. That said, these three languages indeed share one really interesting property, which is that the majority of educated speakers of each of these languages is minimally bilingual, and in many cases, in fact, multilingual. The title of this slide is a reference to a Wallace Stevens poem, which is 13 Ways to Look at a Blackbird. And one of the lines is, I was of three minds, like a tree with three blackbirds in it. And that's sort of how I think of these speakers. Indeed, they have three languages operating, as we've seen and as we've heard throughout this conference, simultaneously. The question is, for the syntactician, should this make a difference? And many people might say, no, why should it? We're looking at structures, right? But maybe I should frame the question a little bit differently. Maybe I should be asking, well, but then does it make a difference? So let's actually look at a profile of each of the languages first. So Slovenian. Slovenian is spoken by about 2 million speakers. That's a pretty small number. Yet with this very small number of speakers, there are minimally 6 identifiable regional dialects. And some of these dialects are pretty close to standard Slovenian, but some are in fact not at all mutually intelligible with standard Slovene. That is to say, if you speak the Prekmurski dialect, which is spoken on the border with Hungary, a person who only knows standard Slovene will not be able to understand you. There are no speakers of Prekmurski dialect who don't also speak standard Slovene, so you can't know too much about that, but certainly in the other direction, standard Slovene speakers can't understand when people speak Prekmurski dialect. In addition, the country shares borders with Austria, Hungary, Italy, and Croatia. Small country, lots of borders. So people on these borders tend to be bilingual. There are employment opportunities that will encourage them to be bilingual. And also, until fairly recently, Slovenia was part of Yugoslavia, and the state language of Yugoslavia was Serbo-Croatian. So certainly you'll find that the older generation of speakers, and by older, I mean that includes me, people who were educated before 1992, you know, who were in school before 1992, know Serbo-Croatian. Okay, Tamil. There are nearly 68 million people in Tamil Nadu alone, and there are certainly speakers of Tamil outside of Tamil Nadu. Tamil is a highly diglossic language, which means that the standardized language, the written language, is really, really different from what most people actually speak. In addition to that, there are minimally 9 identifiable dialects. Some of them are regional, some of them are defined by socioeconomic status. The state borders on 3 other states, each with a different language, though all of these languages are indeed genetically related to Tamil. The 3 states are Kerala, where Malayalam is spoken, Karnataka, where Kannada is spoken, Andhra Pradesh, where Telugu is spoken. In addition, until fairly recently, India was occupied by the British, and English became one of the official state language, and it is the lingua franca in many, many circles. It's the language of most people's education. Okay, so we've got Slovenian and Tamil. Moving on to Georgian. Georgian has roughly 5 million speakers, also a small country, but the terrain is such that speakers are split up into lots of different groups. So there are approximately 18 geographically defined dialects. Some are very close to the standard, while others are nearly mutually unintelligible, or actually mutually unintelligible with the standard. And in fact, within Georgia itself, there are 3 different languages that are spoken. All of them are Kartvelian, part of the same language group as Georgian. Those 3 languages are Georgian, Svan, and Mingrelian. Now, almost all of the speakers of Svan and Megruli, Mingrelian in English, Megruli in Georgian, all of the speakers of Svan and Mingrelian also speak Georgian. In addition to this, to complicate matters even further, until fairly recently, Georgia was part of the Soviet Union, so it was really common for Georgians also to speak Russian. Now, a lot of the younger generation there is a push against this after several, invasions. And now younger speakers tend to want to learn English instead as a foreign language, but still there are a lot of people who want to learn Russian. Okay, so let's go back to the question of syntax now that you're a little bit more familiar with the context of the languages that I work on. And the question of form and meaning in syntax. So the fundamental question that I ask myself in looking at multiple languages is, okay, what is the relationship between what speakers want to say and how they say it? Okay, and this actually relates to another question, right? And that is, do the structural differences we find actually indicate a meaning or a semantic difference, or are these differences just simply reflexes of some mechanism, simple, albeit arcane, mechanical differences? In particular, I look at ways to express the superlative degree adjective. So what's that? So examples in English: best, worst, tallest, happiest, silliest. You get the idea. These are superlative degree adjectives. They're adjectives expressing the highest degree of whatever that adjective is. So you have a bare adjective, something like bad, and then you have the comparative form, which is worse, and then you have the superlative, which is worst. And as it turns out, when it comes to these very specific constructions, when it comes to superlatives, we can actually identify what appears to be a universal cross-linguistic generalization, which is like, whoa, because these are, not so easy to come by. But Babelik, in his 2012 book, came up with one, and it seems to be pretty robust. That is to say, the representation of the superlative, something like worst, right? The superlative form, properly contains that of the comparative. So that is to say, the word worse is contained inside the word worst. Does that make sense? The word greener is contained inside the word greenest. And that is the containment hypothesis. And in some cases, this is really transparent, right? So this is an example from Slovenian. The way to say beautiful is lep. Lepši is more beautiful. And then the superlative is najlepši. And you can actually see najlepši contains lepši, contains the comparative. This is a very robust generalization, and he really, confined it to talking about the form. But as it turns out, the same is kind of true of the meaning, that the meaning of the superlative properly contains the meaning of the comparative. So I'm going to give you some definitions. They're not great. I mean, they're not so clear. They're not in English, basically, is what I want to say. That's not the real takeaway, but okay, definition of a comparative: X exceeds Y and Z, where Z is a gradable property. Definition of a superlative: for all Y, where Y represents any individual term within a specified domain that also includes X and Y is not X. X exceeds Y and Z, where Z is a gradable property. Essentially, blah, 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 okay? That's fine. The takeaway here is that the superlative is basically the same as the comparative. That is to say, the definition of the comparative is embedded in the definition of a superlative. But additionally, the definition of a superlative includes the word all and this notion of a domain, a specified domain. And we'll get to exactly what each of these things is. But basically, the formula for making a superlative degree adjective is the comparative adjective, so worse, plus what I can call a universal quantifier, basically the word all, and what we could call a domain restriction, either explicit or implicit. Now, we could say something like, Kate is the best student. I could say, Kate is the best student. And I might implicitly mean in my class currently, right? That would be the domain. Among whom is she the best student? And that could be implicit. I don't necessarily need to say it, or I could say it explicitly. Okay, so this seems to be how you construct a superlative degree adjective. And it's a pretty robust generalization, but in spite of that, of course, there are significant differences in how it's expressed. And in fact, in the languages that I work on, we can see some of that variation. Let's take a look first at Tamil. Tamil. Why is that not working? Oh, okay. All right, here we go. All right, Tamil. Here is the comparative. This is a comparative sentence, right? Ramu is taller than Mohan. Ramu and Mohan are my cousins. Some people in my family are tall. Genetics. Okay, so Ramu Mohanai vida oiramanavan. Ramu Mohan than tall. Now to create the superlative, dun, 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 it's actually pretty easy. You basically just replace Mohan with the word all, that universal quantifier, right? Ramu ellarayum vida oiramanavan. Ramu is taller than everyone is literally what that means, but that translates to Ramu is the tallest. Turns out Tamil and Georgian are actually pretty much the same in this. They include overtly this term all, right? So we can say in Tamil, Ramu Vagupille. Vagupille is going to be the domain in the class. Yella manavargalai vidayum oiramanavan. Ramu is the tallest student in the class. In Georgian, if I want to, again, all is explicitly mentioned. Gaia qwelaze uprop atara studentia means Gaia is the smallest student. Qwelaze meaning of all. Okay, so we've seen the universal quantifier. What about the domain thing? In English, it can show up as a modifying prepositional phrase, but it can also show up as a clause. So Joseph is the tallest person in the room. There's a prepositional phrase, but you could also see it as a clause. Joseph is the nicest person that I ever met, right? This bracketed clause in 7 is often called a relative clause, which basically just means a clause that modifies a noun. So that I ever met modifies person in the same way that nicest modifies person, which person that I ever met. So is that really what it is? Is it a relative clause, is what I ask. And Slovene gives us some insight into this. So let's look at a Slovenian relative clause. Here we have the sentence, Maja is the linguist that I met. Maja je ta jezikoslovka, ki sem jo spoznala včeraj. Now, this is the relative clause, and it has this word that we saw in English, right? It's key. In addition, it has something that English doesn't have, which is this pronoun. Maja is the linguist that I met her yesterday, is how they say this, right? And her really refers to linguist, right? And they look the same. In fact, linguist is feminine in Slovenian, and it's feminine. The pronoun is feminine. It's singular. The word jezikoslovka, and the pronoun is singular. So it matches, right, that I met her yesterday, referring to that individual. So it matches something else in the sentence, and that's the real key to this. So Maja is the linguist that I met her yesterday. Not really something we'd say in English, but actually it's not that weird. Lots of languages have these kinds of pronouns and relative clauses, including some of the languages spoken on the border with Slovenia, like Croatian. Okay, so to je profesor, što sam ga jučer upoznao. That is the professor that I met him yesterday. Now notice, professor is masculine, singular. The pronoun is also going to be masculine and singular, right? That's natural in these kinds of constructions. And these constructions appear all over the place. But let's look at what Slovene does once a superlative adjective, the thing like best, is introduced. Here the word is smartest. That's our superlative adjective. Well, remember I called it a key relative clause? The word that has a different form suddenly. So once you have a superlative degree adjective, what you get in the clause is a different, what we call relativizer. But in addition, Maja is the smartest linguist. Notice linguist again, nominative singular feminine, that I met them yesterday. I'm so sorry. Okay, I'll get to it. Sorry. Okay, that I met them yesterday. So that's plural, doesn't match anything else. That is weird. Okay, Slovenian is the only language that I know that does this. And in Croatian, you would get just a normal relative clause using the same structure. To je najpametniji profesor, što sam ga juče upoznao. Okay, but the Slovenian Carphrase is a really well-attested construction, and using a corpus search, I saw that there were nearly 6,000 sentences for constructions just using the superlative adjective najboljši, meaning best, and the Carphrase. And of these, the vast majority, you had that plural pronoun, which with a superlative, when you have something like, she's the best student that I ever had, them, you kind of get, even if you don't speak Slovene, which none of us does, you get why it's there, right? Of all of the students, that them represents the whole domain, right? So in the vast majority, that's what you see reflected in the syntax. But there are exceptions, and where do the exceptions come from? Okay, so there's the sailor. This guy said this, right? One of the sentences in the corpus. That was one of the most heartwarming receptions I ever saw it in my life. Here we have the singular, right? Maybe it comes down to this word Eden. So maybe a less ambiguous. I wanted to bring this up because he's a sailor and that's relevant. But in a less ambiguous case, to je bil najlepši dopust, ker sem ga doživela. That was the best vacation that I had it. Again, singular. The significance, and now I'm done, all of these speakers who produce the kar plus it construction, the singular, come from the Adriatic coast of Slovenia on the border with Croatia. And it looks like their second language, Croatian, the syntax of their second language, is potentially influencing the syntax of their first language. And that appears to be the source of the variation that we find in the corpus, as far as I can see. So the conclusion is that we syntacticians need to be thoughtful, I say careful here, but yeah, careful, thoughtful, about the linguistic backgrounds of our informants. We use bilingual informants for a variety of reasons. They're sometimes the majority of speakers. It's easier to talk to them. And maybe, many of them are also linguists and can answer direct questions about grammar, so we go to the bilingual speakers. But this actually may affect the data that we gather, as it appears that the two languages can actually directly affect each other's syntactic patterns. Okay, so sorry for going over. And najlepša hvala, Didi Madloba, Miga Nandri. Thank you.